Hello, I'm Rachel Siegel, the Executive Director of the Primavera Fund, and I would like to welcome you to our Sterling Masterclass online series. We've had to go online in response to the COVID-19 crisis, but we're very excited to be able to bring you this content in your homes every single week. So please check back for a new video on a new topic every Thursday at 4, and stay safe.
Hi everyone, my name is David Jackson. I am the trombone professor at the University of Michigan, and I'm thrilled to be giving this masterclass today for the Primavera Fund. And I decided to choose as a masterclass topic practicing and how we can best go about organizing our practice time and getting the most out of our practice time. Although most of the details I'll be using during the masterclass will pertain to trombonists, I hope it can be helpful for everyone. So I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. So you'll see here that we have 3 columns: the warm-up, technique, and musical literature. And I'll tell you right away, typically what happens with young musicians in the practice room is they go straight from the first column to the third column. Sometimes they don't even bother with the first column. They go straight to the third column and skip all of the rest. And we're here to try to make your practicing as efficient as it can possibly be. So I'll first talk about the fact that I want you to consider a clear distinction between the warm-up column and the technique column. A lot of people refer to the warm-up as, oh, it takes me about an hour to warm up, to get through my warm-up, or I've downloaded so-and-so's warm-up, and I've been practicing this warm-up that I saw in a master class once. And I want you to make a clear distinction between the warm-up and technique, in that the warm-up itself is basically like a pre-flight check, in which we're making sure that everything is in working order before we get to work for the day. So let's talk about some of the things that can go into this pre-flight check. From the very, very beginning, I will say, when it comes to the warm-up, use your very, very best sounds from the start. There's a tendency oftentimes with young trombone players that in the warm-up, it's okay not to sound great, because you know that if you keep at it, it's going to get a little bit better. But what we lose is that intent from the very beginning of the warm-up to make the most beautiful sounds that you are capable of making. So make your very best sound from the start. First thing you want to put in the warm-up: breathing. Breathing gives us an opportunity to relax, to focus, and of course it is the most important tool that we have as wind players. The way we breathe, and relaxation is the name of the game. So I'm sure that some of your teachers have given you breathing exercises, and really we're not going to deal with too many specifics in terms of what exactly to play to fill these categories. We can do some of that in our live session if necessary, but I really want you to make sure you're thinking about the things that are most important to put into these columns. Next, we'll move on to long tones. So right away, we start to apply this wind to vibration. We think about that wonderful combination of wind moving through the lips with a nice steady vibration to produce beautiful sounds. So here's where we might do a fairly simple Remington type long tone exercise. Next, we move on to lip slurs. Lip slurs are an opportunity for us to start moving through the partials, at first slowly, then more quickly. And once again, I would refer to Remington type exercises for some very basic lip slur routines as part of your warm-up. Then moving on, I would say some sort of articulation. That could be in the form of scales. That could be in the form of very simple articulation exercises. But like I said before, we're keeping it fairly simple for this column, just to do our warm-up and make sure everything is in working order, and we're making our very, very best sounds at the beginning of the day. So now we get to our second column, technique. And in many ways, this is the most important column for us to consider, and the one that often is considered the least, especially by young players who, like I said before, go straight from column A to C, or skip A and B altogether and go straight to C. These are the things that we do each day to become better trombonists. And if you're not sure what those things need to be, just stop and think for a moment about any aspect of your playing that you wish were better than it is. And if you have trouble doing that, then think a little bit about the lessons you've taken over the years and some of the things that have come up again and again in these lessons. Well, this is where they all go. So in no particular order, I'm going to add a few things to this list. And you'll see that there may be from time to time things in this list that are the same or very similar to the things that were in our warm-up list. But the difference here is that we're going to be using more extensive and detailed exercises to achieve some of these goals than the ones that we used as part of our warm-up routine. So the first thing on the list, once again, is wind. So whatever wind exercise we may have done to jumpstart our day will be a lot more extensive and detailed here. And for example, we might be focusing on taking quicker breaths and being really efficient. So we might have exercises that are more rhythmicized. Next on the list is sound. So once again, we did a few long tones as part of our warm-up, but here we'll do a much more extensive long tone routine. And I'm really fond of starting these ideas with Remington and then branching out from there. Following sound, we have dynamic control. When we think about what's required of us in solo literature and ensemble literature to play with a fantastic sound at different dynamics, to be able to play high and soft, high and loud, to be able to sustain a sound while changing dynamic, but making sure that sound remains beautiful during that dynamic change. Dynamic control. And there are a lot of different ways to work on this as well. Probably the most simple thing that we do here is to take a long tone, let's say a note that's 8 beats long. We may crescendo for 4 beats and decrescendo for 4 beats, and pick a soft dynamic on one end and a louder dynamic in the middle, or reverse that. Next on the list is articulation. Really important for any wind player, really important for trombonists because of the fact that we have this strange thing called a slide that no other wind instruments have. But articulation, we can spend a lot of time here dealing with legato articulation, staccato, understanding, as trombonists need to understand the difference between tenuto and legato, double tonguing, triple tonguing. There are a lot of different things that we can do here in this category to work on articulation. Next on the list is range. Most people think of range in terms of high range. Everybody wants a better high range. But as tenor trombonists, bass trombonists, we've got to be able to do both. Tenor trombone players, you got to work on your low range. Bass trombonists, believe it or not, you got to work on your high range. So it's really important for us to consider the same issues of sound and articulation as we do this. Therefore, there are a lot of different ways that we can work on range. And, you know, my students hear me say this over and over again, that when it comes to working on these different aspects of our trombone technique, the first place we want to turn is our scales and arpeggios. They are so useful. We can use them to work on almost any aspect of our trombone playing. So range, really great for us to play our scales into the upper register, the lower register, our arpeggios, our thirds as well. Anything that you can think of with scales and arpeggios that help you connect to extending range. And then next on the list, we're going to talk about a couple of areas that really get trombonists into trouble. We get into trouble here behind a screen when people are evaluating our playing, especially people that are not very forgiving of the issues that trombonists deal with. And one of them here is slide technique. Slide technique. It's important here for us because we have to have the ability to sound great playing with no valves or keys. That's really important, and it's very, very different than other members of the wind instrument family. And there's nothing you can say to a person sitting behind a screen when they hear a little bit of a smeary sound between positions that's going to let them think that that's okay. It's a trombonist, that's okay. Not true at all. So we've got to work on our slide technique. I'm a big fan of using Clark studies, and once again, I can be a little bit more detailed and show you some examples of these when we have our Thursday live session. But slide technique is very, very important. The ability to move between positions cleanly with different types of articulations and through different registers. It's an oral and a physical process for us. Next in the list of things that get trombonists in particular into trouble, intonation. We have the world's longest tuning slide, which should give us the ability to always play perfectly in tune. But what we also get with that is the greatest probability of always being completely out of tune. So intonation is something we always have to think about. And in many ways, it's very much connected to slide technique. So we're always listening from the very first notes of the day. And once again, scales and arpeggios, great place to start. Next on the list, let's put flexibility. It's going to be important for us to play easily and evenly between different registers. We want to be able to do that smoothly. We often need to be able to do that quickly, whether it's in the form of legato or different types of articulations that are non-legato. Flexibility is incredibly important for us. And I like to start, once again, with Remington and then branch out from there. And I can be more specific on our Thursday session. So there are a lot of things that you can add to this particular column, and your teacher will help you do that. But one of the things that I want to get across to you is that every category that you have in this second column of technique should have interchangeable parts. It's important that any aspect of our technique, we're coming at it from different directions, which means that we may not use the same exercise every day. When I talk about, for example, range, what are the things that we need to do with range? Well, some days we may focus on being able to articulate cleanly in the upper register. Another day we may focus on the ability to slur in and out of the upper register. Another day we may be thinking about the ability to control really soft dynamics in the upper register. So there are different exercises that have different goals that might go into any of these categories. So I'm a big fan of mixing things up. You know, for example, if you call something a routine, it makes me not want to do it. I don't know about you. Other people thrive on routines. But I think it's really important here that you may have one way of approaching any of these categories on a Monday and a Wednesday, and maybe a different way of approaching those same categories on a Tuesday and Thursday. So mix it up. makes things a lot more interesting and tends to be quite a bit more efficient. So now we finally arrive at our last column. This is the fun one. This is the reason, the entire reason that columns A and B exist. Musical literature. Musical literature, usually we're thinking about solos, large ensemble music, chamber music, audition excerpts. And there are a lot of different things that we can put in this column. I'm just going to list a few, but I'm happy to talk about more in our Thursday session. The first thing I'm going to put here is interpret. Be musical, be expressive, interpret. This is your opportunity to put a personal stamp on everything that you do. And it's also a wonderful opportunity to really learn what this means. What does it mean to be musical and to interpret in different musical time periods and with different composers? And one of the best ways to do that is by the use of recordings. There are so many great artists out there, so many fantastic trombonists out there, and really fantastic musicians that may happen to play instruments other than the trombone, believe it or not. And we can learn from all of them. The important thing, I think, that for young musicians, I'll put it this way. Oftentimes I'll do a listening assignment with one of my students, and I'll give them a particular piece, and I'll tell them to find 3 contrasting recordings and talk a little bit about them. So they'll come back and I'll say, great, what'd you do? Well, I listened to 3 recordings. Well, who'd you listen to? Oh, well, it was this one guy on YouTube, then there was this other person on YouTube. There's so much access, easy access to recordings and videos these days. It's important to be picky, be choosy, and at the very least know who you're listening to and why you've chosen to listen to that particular orchestra or that particular person. There's a lot out there, but be picky, be discerning. The next thing we're going to include in this column is making sure you have a sense of how to navigate difficult passages. And the great thing about this is that most of the problems you encounter here should send you straight back to column B, the second column. Anything that you're having trouble with should tell you exactly where you need to be spending your time in the second column. And we can get into more details specifically of how to navigate difficult passages when we talk on Thursday. But you always want to make sure that you use the tools that are available to you. Using your tools. So I'm here talking about metronome, tuner, and recorder. And when it comes to the metronome, we certainly don't want to simply get into a practice room, turn the metronome on, leave it on the entire time through the end of our session, turn it off, and then leave. Learn how to use a metronome. There are very specific ways of using a metronome that are useful, and we can talk about some of those in our live session. Using our tuner, also incredibly important. Now, this tool can be both visual and aural, and both can be, honestly, both can be very useful. Using a strobe or trying to stop a needle can be a very, very useful process, but it's important to understand that in the end, tuning, when it's happening with other musicians, is an aural process. There's not very much visual that's going to help you other than the occasional dirty look from the podium if something's out of tune. So it's very much an aural process, and I'm a fan of using drones, and once again I can talk more about that on Thursday. And then finally, in terms of using your tools, we'll talk about the recorder, using a recording device. And it doesn't need to be an expensive recording device. It can be something that is on your phone. All 3 of these can be on your phone. my belief is that the easier it is to use, the more you'll use it. The easier it is to carry around with you, the more you'll use it, and the more often you'll use it. So sometimes keeping the devices really simple can be very helpful. It does not need to be an expensive recording device, because mainly we want a recording device that's going to give us a sense of intonation and rhythm. And it does not take an expensive microphone to give us information about either of those things. And there are different ways we can use a recorder. I'm a big fan of using it in very short sessions in the practice room. So we may take a short passage, we play the passage, we record the passage, we listen to the passage, then we rehearse based on what we heard, and then we repeat the entire thing. So that's a very, very quick way to get things done in the practice room. It can also be helpful if you're preparing for a performance and you want to record the entire run-through of a particular movement or a piece or an excerpt, to record that as well. So your recorder can be a wonderful, wonderful tool. What happens oftentimes, I see with young musicians, is if they haven't done this a lot, they get into a situation where they're preparing to record for a competition or a summer festival or scholarship or an audition of some sort. And suddenly they're hearing aspects of their playing that they've never really heard up close before. It tends to freak you out, you know? So it's amazing how much people can improve when they hear things from themselves, for themselves. So recording is really a great way to do that. Another great thing for us to do is to play for others. You know, whenever it's possible, we want to try to simulate a performance experience or an audition experience. And this may be a little bit harder to do in the middle of a pandemic, but it's not impossible. We want to try to play for as many people as we can. And trombone players, it's important for us to play for non-trombonists. You might want to consider playing, for example, William Tell for, say, a flute player that has absolutely none of our same concerns of how fast and difficult we may think William Tell is. You play it for a flute player and they've got no sympathy. So sometimes playing for a non-trombonist is really, really helpful. So next we'll make our way back up to the top of the page to our practice pie. So let's talk a little bit about filling this in. So we have our 3 columns: warm-up, technique, and then musical literature. The only fixed part of this pie will be the warm-up. And I should also mention that this pie does not represent 1 hour of practicing. This pie represents 1 day of practicing. So it does not represent a particular session of practicing, but it represents the type of practicing that we might do throughout a single day. Now, whether or not you break up that day into multiple sessions or 1 long session, that's sort of up to you. And we can talk more about that later as well. But the first part of this pie, which is the warm-up, should be fairly fixed. And like I said, if we're making a clear distinction between what is our warm-up and what is our technique routine, the things that we do to improve each day, then our warm-up doesn't necessarily need to take very long. And here, you can feel free to move this, but let's say that it's going to take maybe 10 to 15 minutes. We'll put our warm-up time about here. And we'll make that a solid line, meaning this is, for the most part, going to stay put and be limited to that 10 to 15 minute period. In a perfect world, we want to spend the majority of our time in column B. We want to spend most of our time doing all the things necessary to make us better trombone players and to doing very detailed work at making ourselves better trombone players. So we want to spend most of our time in column B. So for now, I'm going to put column B here, but with a dotted line. This dotted line meaning that this is highly flexible and can be adjusted to our own personal needs. So like I said, in a perfect world, I would spend most of my time in column B. As a matter of fact, during the pandemic, I'm spending more time in column B than I've ever had an opportunity before, and it's been wonderful. And it's nice to have the time to really focus on very specific aspects of my playing. But if I am giving a recital in 2 weeks, or have a major performance right around the corner, then I might adjust the differences between column B and C to look like this. And the entire point is that all of this is highly flexible and should be adjusted to fit your own specific needs at any given time. So I'll just close by saying that, for all of us, practicing isn't always a joy. Sometimes it's a chore. Sometimes it's a joy. Sometimes it's something that you have to do. But either way, it's important that you get as much out of it as you can, and that when you get into it, you are trying to stay as engaged as you possibly can and goal-oriented. And the other thing I'd like to talk about is think about when you're going to practice. There are different ways of practicing, and you can spread your practicing out throughout the day. Some people tend to try to do it in larger chunks. I find for myself that I tend to focus and concentrate really well in 45-minute chunks, oftentimes with 15-minute breaks or more. And if I've got lots of time, like I do now, then my tendency is to break my practicing up into several sections a day. But during the school year, when I'm busy teaching and performing, I usually don't have that luxury, so I do it in larger chunks. So you can decide what's going to work best for you and when. The other thing I'll say is that when you do practice, have a plan, have a goal. Determine what you want to get done before you walk into the room. It's not great just to walk into the room, grab your instrument, pick it up and start playing, and then reacting to what you're hearing if you haven't already determined what it is you want to hear. So have a plan and have a goal, and your goals can be very small. Your goal can be a particular passage of music. Your goal could be a particular aspect of your technique. Small goals are great. And this one is specifically for college students. For those of you that might be going off to college, it's not too soon for you to think about this where practicing is concerned. I could do an entire talk on the fact that for most college freshmen, one of the biggest things they have to learn how to do is manage their time. Time management is your major your freshman year. And once you figure that out, you can go on with your real major for years 2, 3, and 4 and beyond. But time management is really, really important. And what happens, and what you have to be careful to avoid the freshman year in college where practicing is concerned, is oftentimes a freshman will get their class schedule. And this is for music majors, of course. And you know when you have to go to your theory course, you know when you have to go to your English course or your music history course and your band rehearsal or orchestra rehearsal. And so they look at the schedule of all these required courses, and oftentimes they make the mistake of thinking of their practicing as something that they're going to fit into the middle of all of this. I'll fit half an hour between this and this, and maybe I'll do a little bit here and there between these classes. And I guarantee you that those little imaginary time slots will disappear very quickly. It's important for you to consider your practice sessions just as you do those classes, so that they are etched in stone. They're not variables. So just as important as it is for you to be at your music history class between 2 and 3 o'clock, it is important for you to be in the practice room between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock, and that you write that into your schedule. So time management is really, really important once you start mixing things up in college. It's important in high school too. And then finally, I'll say that in your sessions, in your daily sessions, leave room just to play your favorite music without a care in the world. Just to be musical and to play freely and to enjoy yourself, so that you periodically are reminding yourself of why you got into this in the first place. I think that's very important.